Go. So today we will be presenting our replication project on increasing walking in sedentary adults. Today your presenters are myself, Dustin Espinoza,
Yvonne Harada,
Janice Neely,
Laura Rodriguez,
and Ashley Rowland.
We will be starting our presentation on the literature review, which is presented by Yvonne.
Okay, according to a study on physical activity in the United States, adults reported taking an average of 5,117 steps per day. That is around half of the 10,000 recommended daily steps per day, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. It is suggested that less than 5% of adults meet the CDC's physical activity recommendations. In this study of physical activity in the United States, a pedometer was used for 2 days with participants varying in age, education, location, marital status, ethnicity, and gender. Results showed that US participants take fewer steps than those living in Switzerland, Australia, and Japan. What was concluded was that low levels of physical activity contributes to high prevalence, around 43% of adult obesity in the United States. Meeting the CDC's physical activity recommendations have been shown to increase health benefits and decrease the risk of developing potentially life-threatening or expensive medical challenges. In a study by Iwana et al., walking 10,000 steps per day or more for 12 weeks was effective at lowering elevated blood pressure, sympathetic nerve activity, and maximal oxygen intake for those participants with hypertension. A 36-week study on sedentary obese participants adhering to the Center for Disease Control daily step recommendations showed significant weight loss and decrease in cardiovascular risks. According to the CDC, getting at least 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity aerobic activity can put you at a lower risk for many diseases such as heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and colon, lung, and breast cancers. In addition, physical activity can help improve bone and muscle strength, mental health and mood, and can overall increase chances of living longer. With the rising costs in healthcare, this is also an important area to examine on a larger economic scope. Aogi and Shepard, 2011, examined data from the Nakanojo study to see if there was an association between health improvements, step count, and overall health care costs. In this study, inexpensive step tracking devices were used with Japanese participants in an elderly community to facilitate, increase, and measure step counts. The pedometers were worn 24 hours a day for 1 year, and the results showed that health-related quality of life was higher in physically active persons than in sedentary persons, determined by the amount of step counts. The data analysis suggested that if even a small portion of the least active groups had made a jump of 2,000 steps per day or more, a significant reduction of medical costs might be anticipated. Further research in this area is needed. Pedometers have been shown to be an inexpensive and practical way to measure daily step counts. The immediate feedback of pedometers have also been suggested to have a motivational benefits to increasing step counts. In a meta-analysis of the effects of pedometer-based physical activity interventions, data from 32 studies were analyzed. The results suggested that the use of pedometers had a moderate and positive effect on increasing physical activity, with a mean effect size of 0.68, or an average increase of 2,000 steps in all studies. The study that we attempted to replicate, Curdy and Dallery 2013, tested the feasibility, accessibility, and efficacy of an internet-based intervention with the use of strap-on pedometers called the Fitbit. In experiment 1 of the study, an internet-based monetary contingent management system was used. The ideas of incentives to additionally facilitate changes in behaviors were derived from the basic operant learning theory associated with B.F. Skinner. To assess the other contributing factors, such as self-monitoring and experimenter feedback, experiment 2 was conducted identically, but without the monetary contingent management component. The goal of the replication of experiment number 2 in Curdy and Dallery's study was to see if we could get similar results when using an internet-based intervention and pedometer measuring tool without monetary rewards to increase participant step counts.
The purpose of this study was to increase walking in sedentary adults. As Yvonne said, the Centers for Disease Control engaged in 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. Now, moderate intensity is defined as any activity that requires an exertion level equivalent to a brisk walk. According to the CDC, this can be done in increments of 10 minutes, 10 minutes a day, or 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. It does not have to be done all at once. Exercise is vital to good health, as meeting the CDC's physical activity recommendation attenuates the risk of developing heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, and certain types of cancer. If you look at the chart on the left, a group of adults aged 50 years and older were surveyed, and they were asked, what percentage inactive are you? Or what percentage of inactivity is correlated with the chronic disease? So if you look at the chart, there's an inactive column. 50% of people who reported themselves to be inactive had zero chronic disease, whereas 45% of people who reported themselves inactive did have a chronic illness or disease. In the center column, we have insufficiently active. So we're talking about 4.7 million people. So insufficiently active is they are a little more active, but they're not getting that 150 minutes per week. So about 60% of people who reported themselves to be insufficiently active had zero chronic diseases, but 45% did have chronic diseases. If we look over at the last column, 6.7 million responders was active. 70% active had zero chronic disease, and only about 30% had a chronic disease. So we can see that the more activity level that these responders are reporting, the lower likelihood of them having a chronic disease is. And that chart came from the Risk Factor Surveillance Center of the CDC.
Okay, so going into methods, we started with what are we actually tracking here? So our group operationally defined walking as the act of alternating footsteps, the movement of an ascending to descending foot resulting in contact with ground, counted by a motion sensor pedometer. And that's going to take us down to our materials. So from the study, we replicated the use of Fitbit. And our group had discussed different devices that we could use with everything from the Fitbits to, you know, Apple Watches. And we agreed to use the health app, mostly because of the convenience that it's already downloaded onto every smartphone. So it was convenient and consistent throughout all participants. Going into that convenience, the health app automatically was collecting the data. So as a group, all we had to really do was agree to, you know, wear and keep your phone on you for that health app to collect the data from waking moment to the moment we went to sleep, with the exception of water activities. So our group contained 5 participants, and I'm going to kind of talk about some common factors between all of us that played a role in our step counts. So starting off with occupation, each participant has a role in some kind of behavior service or special education, which really goes into duties. So we have a pretty good combination of people collecting data, interpreting data, and also that field time of working with clients and students. We also agreed on common settings. So we have home, workplace, local community, shopping, which we defined as the gas station, grocery shopping, those kinds of things. So looking at these participants, something else to think of is, as we have our occupations in there, all participants were working 35 hours per week and up. So going back to the time that's devoted to our day for that physical activity, a lot of it is during the working hours. So that's a pretty big variable to keep in mind. We have our last participant here, Ashley Rowland. So you can see again where that occupation is, behavior specialist. A lot of those same duties and settings apply. Going into our research design, our replication used a changing criterion design. So at week 1, that counted just taking that baseline data without any goal chosen or necessary to abide by. So I think that for our group, one of the biggest, most important factors of this week was just keeping your phone on you so that we had that accurate data. Making sure it's in your pocket and on the table and not in your purse. And then going on to week 2, that's our first actual concrete goal to obtain steps. So we started with the goal of 3,000 steps in 3 out of 5 days. And then from there, we go to week 3. So participants who met that 3,000 step count are going to increase their 4th highest step count from week 2, or increase their step count from week 2 by 1,000 steps. So for example, if you met that criteria of 3,000 steps at week 2, you need to increase it by 1,000 for a total of 4,000. For participants who did not meet week 2's goal, they're going to try to reach that goal again. So their goal is to obtain 3,000 steps. That pattern continues throughout the rest of the this design. So you'll see the same thing for week 4 and 5 of trying to increase from the 4th highest step count of the prior week, or increasing it by 1,000 steps. And again, if you're not meeting that goal, that you're reattempting to meet that previous week's goal. By your final week, week 6, if you've been abiding by the increase in the 1,000 steps, then you should be ending at 7,000 steps. For participants who were going off of their 4th highest step count, you're going to see a little bit more variability in their goals, a little bit more of individual results. So going into IOA, we chose to compare the steps taken from the health app to a Fitbit Flex 2. To do this, a participant took both pedometers and went around a lap that equaled out to a mile. They did 3 miles and took the data via screenshot at the end of each mile. And you can see at the bottom here for results that the health app consistently is marking at less steps than the Fitbit Flex 2. So you'll see that from the first lap, second, and third. And to gather that IOA data, we took the lowest step count and divided it by the highest and multiplied it by 100. So you'll see that across all 3 laps, we have a 98.5% IOA, 98.4, and 98.7, giving us all above 80%, so pretty good inter-observer agreement.
So here are the results from our intervention. First up is myself. As you can see, there are 6 conditions, including the baseline phase, and I used the 1,000 step increase when I met my goal for each criteria. I had a baseline average of 4,323, and my steps ranged from 1,430 to 8,068. The criteria for phase 1 was 3,000 steps and ranged from a low of 795 to a high of 5,289. The 3,000 step criteria was met, and I was able to move on to the second goal. In criterion 2, the average was a total of 2,583 steps and had a range of 1,813 to 3,213. I did not meet my step goal of 4,000 steps, therefore my goal in criterion 3 the average was 2,276.6, and the steps range from 1,213 to 3,905. Again, the goal was not met, so it stayed the same in criterion 4. Here, the average was 3,651. The low range was 2,143 with a high of 7,035. Again, the goal was not met, so the criterion stayed the same, and the average for criterion 5 was 4,651 with a range from 1,507 to 1,325. On the next page, we're going to take a look at the graph. So you can clearly see all the phases with the criteria needed to be met labeled at the top. So there's baseline, 3,000, 4,000, 4,000, 4,000, 4,000. And in the first phase, you can see that I was above my goal of 3,000 for 3 out of the 5 days. The second, third, and fourth phases clearly show that all my daily steps were under the goal with the exception of day 22. And in the last phase, I was able to increase step count above 4,000 for 3 out of the 5 days. Next up is Dustin's data. So in baseline, Dustin's average was 4,383.2, and his range was 3,260 to 5,452. In criterion 1, the goal was 3,000 steps, and his average consisted of 5,204.8 steps with a range of 2,619 to 11,431. So Dustin was able to meet his step goal and move on to a 4,000 step goal for criterion 2. His average was 4,676.2, low of 3,291, and a high of 3,208. Next, again, increased his step count another 1,000 to 5,000 steps in criterion 3. 206.8 steps, and his range was 2,765 to 11,504. Dustin did not meet the 5,000 step goal, so his goal stayed the same for criterion 5. Here his average was 5,564.6 with a range between 4,196 to 8,112. He did not meet the 5,000 step goal, so his goal stayed the same for criterion 5. In this condition, his average was 7,265.6 with a range of 3,932 to 16,260. So next we're going to look at his graph. And when you take a look at criterion 1 and 2, you can see that Dustin was above his step goal on almost all of his days. And criterion 3 and 4, you can see that his step count was under his goal of 5,000, with the exception of days 20, 24, and 25. And in criterion 5, he was able to increase his step count above the 5,000 goal for 3 out of the 5 days. Dustin's data does have some variability, for example, days 8, 20, and 28, but for the most part, it was pretty stable. Next up is Yvonne, and her baseline average was 1,917 with a range of 235 to 4,988. For criterion 1, Yvonne added 1,000 steps to her average, therefore making her goal 2,917. So in criterion 1, her average was 3,114.6, a range of 1,152 to 6,049. She did not meet the step goal, so she stayed at the same criterion for criterion 2. Her average for criterion 2 was 1,556.6 with a range of 436 to 3,266. Criterion 3 stayed at the goal of 2,917. So her average was 2,700.4 steps, with her low being 39 and her high being 2,158. Criterion 5 stayed the same, and in this condition, she averaged 2,917 and had a range of 864 to 6,196. So when we look at Yvonne's graph, you see all the conditions with the goals at the top. And so if we take a look at our data, you can see a lot more variability than Dustin's. There's a lot more highs and lows. So this data is a lot more variable. Next up is Janice. So she has 6 conditions, including baseline, and she also used the 1,000 step increase when she met her goals. The baseline average was 4,018 with a range of 2,675 to 6,108. In criterion 1, her goal was 3,000 steps. Her average was 4,632, and her range was 2,992 to 6,967. Janice was able to meet her goal. Therefore, she increased her goal to 4,000 steps in criterion 2. Here, her average was 5,532, and her range was 4,002 to 6,800 steps. We met her goal again, so she increased another 1,000. So in criterion 3, her goal was 5,000, her average was 6,292, her range was 6,011 to 6,803. Again, she met her goal, so it increased to 6,000 steps for criterion 4. Her average was 8,938. Her range was 8,027 to 9,274. So she met that goal again and was able to increase another 1,000. So her last goal, 7,000 steps. Her average was 10,223, with her range being 9,983 to 10,878. Next page is her graph with all her data. And when we take a look at her graph, you can see that her data shows an upward trend that's gradually increasing, and there's really not much variability here. It shows a gradual increase. Our last participant is Laura. In her baseline, her average was 8,731, and her range was 6,141 to 14,220. For criterion 1, her goal was 3,000. Her average was 5,356, and her range was 255 to 9,120. So she met her goal and increased her step goal to 4,000 in criterion 2. Her average was 6,013. Her range was 900 to 8,276. She met that goal as well. So she increased to 5,000 steps in criterion 3. Here she averaged 7,044 steps, and her range was 1,781 to 10,157. So she met that goal as well and increased 6,000 steps in criterion 4. Her average was 7,829 with a range of 1,405 to 10,867. She met her last goal, therefore increased her step count to 7,000 in criterion 4. And her average was 7,619 with a range of 2,164 to 10,192. So when we take a look at the graph, you see all her phases and all her lines are there. Her data shows a little bit more variability than Janice's, but it still shows an increasing trend.
Finally, we will discuss the conclusion to our research. So as we assess from the results, daily steps can be increased when an intervention is in place. Participants, that would be 4 out of the 5 of us, were able to increase their daily step count from baseline when self-monitoring and weekly step goals were implemented as the intervention. Self-monitoring meaning that each participant was expected to record their daily step count into a data collection Excel spreadsheet and then graph that according to each day and each week. And then as we saw in the criteria, each week had different step goals, 3,000, 4,000, so on and so forth. The number of opportunities to attain the weekly step goal was structured into the experimental design, meaning that 3 out of the 5 days criteria for reaching weekly goals was established, which provided flexibility in goal attainment. If there was one day of lower step count, there was would not necessarily do any harm as long as the other days of the week, so the other 4 days, 3 of them were above the step goal for that criteria. Increasing the number of steps may be attributed to either of the following rationales. So either the social contingencies of meeting weekly or the overall goal criteria provided a motivating operation. So what that translates to is each participant was expected to follow the intervention and display their data by the end of the experiment. So again, what that means is that because this is a social experiment, we are all participants in the research, there was an expectation for us to attain these goals. And so because we're all following the same intervention, there might be that expectation that we all must also attain these goals. The other rationale, behavioral influence due to the immediacy of feedback from step collection devices, so our mobile phones, that displayed the number of steps away from the daily goal in comparison from previous days. As we discussed earlier in the presentation, that could add another kind of motivation, being able to determine how many steps you're away from meeting your criteria, or comparing your steps from the previous day and essentially trying to motivate yourself to attain your goal. However, participants were unable to attain the experiment's 10,000 step terminal goal, which is set by the CDC. So the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, recommends that adults reach 10,000 steps of physical activity, so that can mean running, speed walking, jogging, exercising, to contribute to overall health. The results of the experiment show that all participants were unable to attend the CDC's 10,000 step goal over the course of the 5-week intervention. This may include a number of reasons for not reaching the terminal goal. Some of them might be opportunities to reach 10,000 steps were limited, time, setting, health-related concerns. So someone gets sick, maybe they can't attend their steps for that day or even for that week. as we went over with describing each of the participants of this project, time is of an element. We're all full-time. We might not have an opportunity to get the steps, especially some of us that maybe don't move a lot. And then again, same with setting. Maybe the setting does not yield opportunities to get steps necessarily. Motivating operations for reaching 10,000 steps was absent. Another rationale is that maybe we're not all that motivated to get these steps regardless of an intervention that may be in place. The consequences for goal attainment was less efficacious as step count criteria increased over each week, meaning that the motivation or the consequence for us reaching our criteria were not satisfactory or not effective at increasing our step count over time. And then lastly, it could be reinforcement for reaching weekly step count goals either lack the necessary strength or the magnitude, the immediacy or consistency to improve behavior. As I discussed earlier in the conclusion, our intervention were self-monitoring and then just setting a weekly step count. That might not be necessarily as reinforcing or a strong enough reinforcer to improve behavior, or due to the fact that that immediacy might be delayed over the course of the week as you increase your step count. Overall, intervention that focuses on self-monitoring or self-reporting and weekly goal criteria may need to be altered to include additional strategies for increasing steps to 10,000. That could also mean maybe a monetary reinforcement for reaching your goal.
Okay, so we identified several limitations of the study. One of the limitations was the weather. We said participants were less likely to go outside and actually get some physical exercise walking if the weather was less than suitable. In some regions where participants lived, it was possibly snowing or raining, while in other regions, the weather was perfect for going out and walking. So especially because members of this replication study live in different regions of the United States. Some of us are in California. I live in the desert. Others live in Indiana, places like that. We had very different experiences with weather during this study. Another limitation was just inconsistency. With using the smart apps on our phone or the health apps on our phone, occasionally participants may have forgotten to pick up their phone and take it with them when they walked back and forth to the car or the mailbox or from their desk to the office. So that could create a less accurate step count than possibly having like a strap-on Fitbit scenario like happened in the original study. A third limitation was our individual work and school schedules. We noticed that there was a trend that the number of steps would decrease for all participants during which exams and school projects were due. So if we had a lot of time where we had to sit and work on the computer to get our work done, we were less likely to be able to go out walking and get those steps in. Also, we have a variety of different jobs held by our participants. So some jobs require a lot more walking than others. Whereas one person may have spent a lot of time that week filling out paperwork for their clients, things like that. Others may have been up and actively doing sessions with their clients or walking around during the business day. Another limitation was the lack of daily verification. We did not require our participants to send in the data every night, but to track it on their own. So this made it common for participants to look at the data weekly instead of daily, especially since we said that we would each create graphs and update them weekly. We didn't share those graphs because we didn't want to add in any extra motivating operations. But just by not having to share them, it's possible that participants weren't looking at their data every night, and that could have decreased motivation for some or changed motivating factors for others. The next limitation was the lack of accountability. Although the phones tracked the steps, there was no way to verify that the participant was the only one who took steps while holding the fitness tracker. I know in my situation, it was possible that my child may have taken my phone and walked a few steps or something like that. So there's no way to verify who was actually taking the steps. The shorter time frame of this replication project did not allow participants to get up to the 10,000 steps, whereas the original project that we were replicating gave participants more time, and many of them were successful in reaching that 10,000 steps because their study went over the course of an entire 2 months, whereas ours was shortened into just 5 weeks.
And lastly are our references. We have about 3 pages of references that we used for our study to gather all of our information for our project.
Thank you everyone for joining us during this presentation, and hope the information is one valuable and provides you for a means of also increasing your step count. Thank you.